think transmutation is one of the most important concepts that there is. As far as growth, as far as development, as far as awakening, as far as healing. And it's in that category of topics where there's a lot of mystery around it. And, in the same way that the consciousness is still quite mysterious. So I think I've said it many times before on here, but transmutation, generally speaking, as I understand it, is this process of change that happens that is analogous to the alchemy model, or I should say the alchemy model makes an analogy of changing one metal into another metal. And the general idea is that in classical physics, that's not possible. You can't turn lead into gold, for example. And there were lots of attempts at that at a certain phase of history, kind of for obvious reasons, that people thought that maybe if they could come up with the recipe, or if they could put it under enough heat or enough pressure, or something, they could sort of fabricate gold, or convert other metals into gold, and they were not able to do it. So the magic of transmutation is kind of inherent in that in alchemy, in spiritual alchemy, there is this miraculous shift from one type of or one form of, or one vibrational frequency of an energy to a different energy. And the idea is that the ego mind, from the ego mind perspective, or from the cognitive rational perspective, it doesn't seem possible. It doesn't make sense. So, for example, how can you take hatred and turn it into, let's say, passion, loving passion, right? It doesn't, the general way that it's thought about is, no, hatred is hatred and loving passion is loving passion, and that they are two different things, which is a whole different concept than they are the same thing in two different forms. So it's a radical shift. If you like, it matters which one is true, like, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because if it's true that the energies that they all start out from this primordial ground, and that to get, gold, so to speak, you start with lead, and meaning in the psyche. So there's that aspect, just as far as conceptually, what is it? It's this change process that happens that changes one substance into literally a different substance. So let's say that's true. How does that happen? The way I understand it, it happens as an imaginal realm process where the internal working of the psyche, meaning the inner dimensions, there's a process that occurs in there that changes this, and it's not a logical process. It doesn't follow the rules of logic or of reason. It's not a insight practice or something. It's experienced by humans as a confusing struggle between opposing forces within oneself. So the transmutation process feels like a forging and a working through within the human psyche, a digesting it's typically very deceiving. It feels like one is being destroyed. It feels like one is dying. Feels like one is giving up. Feels like the very fabric of one's reality and one's sense of, for example, right and wrong is getting turned upside down.
Is that like closer to the end of it? Like, are there kind of steps? Are there stages? Because like you mentioned confusion and like struggle. Mm. And so like they're kind of, that seems less severe than death. Right. Yeah. So like in that process, they're kind of like, are there felt like psychic or, in the psyche steps to
it? I'd say yes. And there's lots of models out there that, that list steps.
Read a book.
Yeah. Like in alchemy, you hear about the various stages. So it's one of these things that can vary greatly depending on the person and the particular transmutation process that's going on. I'd say we're all always dealing with transmutation in our psyches. It's just that we can have quite intense ones, at certain points in our life. So yeah, the identity piece comes into play. It's like initially I was going to roughly give this stages. There's a experience of opposites in our psyche. Let's say physical aggression. That you have physical aggression as a energetic force, right? If you say that that's, that there's such a thing as physical aggression and that humans wrestle with that, right? That phenomenon, that force, that energy can happen, and a person can be in the throes of that. And there's this strange situation that as humans, we're not just in bodies and then operating via these instinctual forces. We also have these minds that are aware of these instinctual forces, which is thought to be unique to humans. And humans are not only aware of those forces, those energies, those instincts, those drives, those motivations, those thoughts, those feelings, but they're in great conflict with them. It's not all just smooth running and, whatever we're aware of, we're fine with that and just find that fascinating. And we're not only kind of perplexed. We're absolutely terrified, and we're in great we're split from them in such a way that we literally can experience our own energetic forces as alien, as not self. And so one part of our psyche literally is afraid of other parts of our psyche, which is this strange thing. It's like being afraid of your own, of your own hand that, is gonna get you.
Yeah.
But it's very real. It's very true,
For sure.
So it's this whole different school of thought and school of psychology to take that into account and to look at various maladies or various developmental issues in that light, and be considering what is their, to use the psychoanalytic language, what is their ego's relationship to various energies in the body. And again, this is where you get character structure, for example, going on, where characterology is a model for there's categorizations of energy patterns, ways of how is a person's ego dealing with fear, how is it dealing with aggression, how is it dealing with hatred, how is it dealing with sexuality, how is it dealing with power, because there's different things that the psyche can do or does do in relation to those things, and we tend to have our patterns, right? You do it a certain way, I do it a little different,
yeah,
and then there's ideas about what causes that, what kind of wounding, what kind of trauma, what kind of parenting will cause this character structure versus that character structure. So I know I'm always saying the same thing, but that's completely different than the cognitive approach, right? It's the idea that ideas have you, you don't have ideas. The energies have you often. And the goal in alchemy, the goal with transmutation is for you to have the energies, right? So the goal with imaginal activity is to make the unconscious conscious. It's to make it's to change so that your experience of these energies is objective instead of subjective. And what I mean by objective instead of subjective is that initially the energies that are from body, right? So in general, the idea is that the body is unconscious. So there's, this idea of body versus mind, or unconscious versus ego, right? The idea of this faculty of awareness that's aware of these energies. Initially, the energies are just coming through, right? And there's just unconsciousness about it, right? So the idea is that the 2-year-old isn't very aware of their aggression when they're throwing a tantrum. They're just immersed in it. And it's just happening. And it's not happening because they're consciously deciding it, right? It's more that it's just occurring. And no matter how old you get or whatever, these things still happen. You still find yourself going to the bathroom. You still find yourself throwing up. You still find yourself falling asleep, and they're not all, we're not necessarily deciding to do it. It's like it just, our body starts doing it, right? And our mind gets taken along for the ride. And so there's obviously different states that are where we're more or less in control, or more or less know what it is that's actually happening. And so again, it's a really important, I think, fascinating, way that I think it works, but way to look at it, where, at any given moment, we have these energies that are moving in us and that our mind is affected by. But there's the potential for it to go from an energy that's occurring unconsciously to an energy that is that we, let's say, initially experience as other, and we fear it. So, for example, a certain type of aggression, a certain type of power, in a certain state, our mind is literally afraid of it as if it is some other thing, some external thing that's going to get us. And this is something we've all experienced, whether we knew it or not.
Yeah.
We will experience fear, and not just be fearful about some idea, but literally sense an aggressive, negative energy that causes us to be fearful. But we don't know what that aggressive energy is, right? That's a state someone can be in.
Yeah.
And if someone's experiencing that, what's happening is that they are not they're not even having ego awareness of their aggression as their aggression. It feels like it's coming from without. And then there's tremendous tendency in that case to blame something else. So if I'm having that happen right now, there'd be a tendency to blame you, to be experiencing you as aggressive.
Right.
And then, as you know, not only would that be there, but to the extent that I was experiencing it that way, there would be a tendency for you to literally start feeling aggressive. And my understanding of that is that if we're in a state, a relational state, where the dynamic between us is an open system, then there's that idea that certain energies are going to try to move through your mind, and certain energies are going to try to move through mine. And when we're in a shared open system, there's the question of, are they your energies or my energies? And it gets very confusing. And of course, there's the idea of the analytic third, which is that the question of, are they yours or are they mine, is not really the correct question, because the idea is that it takes two. It's that literally that energetic experience is a result of the interaction between you and I, which is an important thing. And you have different theories about that, about intrapsychic experience and about relational experience. And you have certain theorists saying there's no such thing as intrapsychic, there's only relating. And that
why do I feel anything when I'm alone then? Like what? Or like there's
the idea would be you're relating it to
someone else, even though I'm alone.
Yeah.
I think that I'm relating it to someone else in that there's many selves, but like, which is interesting semantic.
Which is another theory, right?
Yeah. It's an interesting nuance to the relational idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So there's a ton that can be talked about in that.
For sure. I just want to make sure I understood that.
So whether it's relational or whether it's a solo experience, there's this relationship between mind and body. And by body, I mean energies. So as far as that movement kind of up the transmutation ladder, it can go from being afraid of that anger or that aggression or that power and feeling like it's coming from without, which might result in anxiety, for example, or paranoia. And then there can be this shift where the person starts to recognize that that power is actually coming from within their own psyche. And so their mind has a different relationship to it, right? They start to own it in a way that let's say previously they didn't. And there can be great conflict about that. The person can think that they're bad because they're experiencing that. They can think they're evil. They can think that they're they can feel out of control and feel like there's potential to really do harm. A person can be in a relationship to that aggression where they literally are feeling aggressive towards self. So a lot of self-harm activity occurs when that's the case. A person can literally feel hatred towards self, hatred towards parts of self. And there's all kinds of ideas about, well, how to work with that, how to cognitively work with that, for example, right? But I think a lot of that misses the mark because the shift that really needs to happen is in the person's relationship to that energy. Now, if a cognitive change can help make that happen, that's great. But often it's a pattern that's seated deeper in the psyche than reframing or some of that stuff is gonna touch. So, what is it that makes that causes a change? Let's say from that anger, that hatred, that aggression being towards self, and then having it shift to where it just feels like a sense of empowerment, right? It's like, what is that occurs that literally the same energy that was a threat to oneself now is not? Well, commonly in between hating myself and having that energy just be a sense of empowerment is often I got to shift it from hating myself to hating other. So to direct it at an object, and then, well, what happens? Why does directing it at an object move the process forward? Two different ways I talk about that. One is, let's say I'm directing it at you. Now there's a relational dynamic, and your system is helping to metabolize and transmute the energy that I was just struggling with. And then the other thing is, if I'm expressing the energy at you, you are being a screen, so to speak, on which I can project that energy. And then when I see that energy on you, I can now look at it with reflective awareness, meaning I see it out there. It's no longer behind the veil, just coming through me, making me feel it or experience it in as though it was self. And so that I didn't say that very well, I don't think, but it's like it's the main thing that needs to occur. So I'll try to say it again. We have these energies. Our mind is activated by the energy. Just like turning on a light bulb, it's like you flip the switch and it's like, look, there's this energetic charge, that is released, and the light bulb goes on, right? And we have that happen in us, and this energetic occurrence happens, and our mind gets an idea. Our mind, we feel a certain emotion, we have a certain desire, we have a certain impulse, we have a certain fear, etc. So when you think of it that way, it's like, okay, that happens, and it's extremely compelling, right? Because it's coming again kind of from behind the veil, so we don't have consciousness of it yet when it's like that. We just start like, what are you talking about? It's it must be true, and it must be real, and it must be right, because I'm feeling it in a very first person way, and it's like, well, that really doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
As far as it being somehow true or right or accurate. But it's very compelling to the person that's experiencing it that way. So this shift to where, wait a second, we can get it out in front of us and then look in a way that is a third person conscious gaze at the thing. Right. Then we start to see, oh, wait a second, this is just something that's coming through me. So it becomes an object in our awareness instead of experiencing it literally as subject.
Yeah.
So again, that distinction between, I'm not saying you don't still experience it as a subjectivity, but you don't experience it as a self. And it's easy to cognitively think, well, of course it's not a self. Of course the anger coming through you isn't a self. It's like, yeah, but until you've made that conscious, it's experienced as a quality of selfhood. Right? That's how we start out. We just our sensations and our emotions and our thoughts are taken to be.
Well, they seem so immediate. Like
yeah,
that
right.
thing you're talking about, like I like the light analogy in this instance, as far as like a light bulb turning on. So like where like it seems immediate, right? And it seems constant initially.
Yeah.
And as you stare at the light, you start to realize that it flickers, and it's not always on, even when it's on.
Yeah.
At least not with the same intensity, and it can be turned off. So there's just this like illusion of immediacy and constancy, and that's the self you're talking about, or the felt sense of self in that state.
Right. Yeah, and it's similar to, if you drink some alcohol or smoke some pot, and then you start feeling, an effect of it. Until you've had too much of it, you're aware that, okay, I'm buzzing right now, or I'm high right now. But like you say, it's this very immediate experience. And of course, if you smoke some pot and then you feel yourself have that familiar high feeling, it's like, okay,
it's what it is.
I don't know if you do infer it or you deduce, or I can't remember what word's the right one, but
the first time you definitely deduce, right? I think you would infer if you smoke pot and then you did another drug, and you're like, oh, this is like pot, you would infer.
Oh,
is that
okay?
Now I'm confusing myself. I'll look it up.
Okay. So the whole alchemical shamanic, imaginal process involves the shift from the energies possessing the mind to consciousness possessing the energies. That's the whole thing. And that's what the dimension approach process is. I'm just putting certain words on it that are more kind of common contemporary words. But it's that it goes from being unconscious, and I'm saying if you witness it, hold it, contain it, mirror it, then it becomes conscious. And that we can do that for ourselves and do that with others, for others. And
just to clarify,
yeah,
the kind of when anger towards self shifts to becoming a sense of empowerment, that's consciousness possessing the energy.
Right.
Yeah, cool.
Right. Yeah, so it brings up the idea of truth, right? Like what is truth? And the idea is that if that consciousness sees truth. So the energy that one can experience as dangerous aggression, is really one's own fight response in one's own system. And so to be able to be in command of, right, to wield that energetic charge, there becomes an awareness that, okay, that energy isn't, A, it's not self, B, it's not inherently good or evil, it's just energy, right? Like heat, you can say heat's bad if it's doing something, if it's destroying something you don't want destroyed. You can say heat's good if it's, maintaining something you want maintained. So it's a really tricky process, this idea of of it going from possessing you to you possessing it. Everyone goes to their rational mind and tries to figure that out and then tries to do it. Everyone's trying to transmute stuff with their cognitive mind, and it's not doable. Like literally, it's not doable. It's like if you're trying to do a certain kind of math, but you're dealing with irrational numbers, and if you're not doing math that involves some kind of inclusion of irrational numbers, you're not going to arrive at the correct answer, right? So that there becomes this conflict when you get into rationality, that you get to this conflict where the energies are not jiving with your mind's understanding of a certain duality in life. The mind is trying to fit the energetic force, the energetic frequency, the imaginal form, whatever it is, the thought, the desire, the impulse, into a category, for example, of is this good or is this bad? So someone will have an urge to strike someone, and then they may think, oh my God, that's bad. I never want to strike anyone. Or an urge to kill someone, or an urge to rape someone, or an urge to make fun of someone, or an urge to belittle someone, or an urge to dominate someone. And then, it's like on paper, most people go, well, that's bad. Like, what are you talking about? There's no there's no debate about, is raping someone good or bad?
Right.
Most of us in contemporary society say that's bad.
Right. We'd like to think there's some things we can put on that list.
Say again?
Would like to think there's some things we can put on that list.
Right. And I'm saying my general understanding is there are not. And what I mean by that is the urge to rape, for example, my understanding of the psychoanalytic idea around it is that the urge is it's an urge that's a primitive urge, if you will, right? And that ideally the mature human or the modern human or the, develop or enlightened human, that their psyche is converting that urge, transmuting that urge into just a healthy, libido, right? A healthy sexual desire. And of course, that's very dicey territory, extremely. Even to discuss the idea of, that theory, even though it's the theory, I'm not making this theory up. I'm just stating a theory that's been around for, a long time. But it's easy to see how we can, in order to not rape, we can deny, repress, split off from, project that energetic force within us. Right. So if there is such a thing as this aggression, and that aggression can be sexual, right? If that's a thing, and that ideally it gets transmuted in the system and expressed in a way that in our society we would consider, not harmful. Then like, in order to be responsible and actually have less rape happen, we should look at that and have understandings of what causes one's psyche to transmute that, and what causes one's psyche to not, right? What parental practices, what traumas, what, types of societal structures inhibit the transmutation of that sexual aggression, for example. And like I've said with all kinds of other issues in modern society, we're doing it in a way that is very, very counter to what the psychoanalytic, the tantric, the shamanic, the alchemical traditions said was the thing to do. Right? Instead of it needs to be, for example, because again, I'm saying what those traditions are all saying. What one of the things they're all saying that are in common is it needs to get witnessed, held, contained, mirrored, and contacted. There's just varying names for that. But if you just shame it, if you don't allow an outlet where it can come through a person and then get made conscious, right? To where it can be allowed to surface in their attention so that they become aware that it's in there, and so that they can go through the process of harnessing it, right? Controlling it, wielding it. Like there's a process that helps one get in control of oneself, which is this process of making it conscious. But if you just start with, well, it shouldn't be in there in the first place, and so you're bad if it's in there, well, then you have a real bad problem. And you tend to have it go one way or the other. The person either has an impulse control problem where they are unable to control it, or they repress it to the degree that they have all kinds of terrible symptoms that are a result of the repression. because again, the idea is that the aggression is necessary for proper functioning of the human body and the human psyche. So the person that represses it too much is going to be, they're going to have anxiety, they're going to have somatic symptoms, they're going to they're going to lack a certain kind of resilience, they're going to have low self-esteem, et cetera, because that very movement of energy is what fuels those qualities in the human mind. So to be resilient, to have courage, to have libido, to have ambition, to have an ability to interact and be confronted with life's difficulties and persevere, it requires that energetic charge. And again, if you're repressing that energetic charge, then you're inhibiting the overall system. So any questions
on transmutation? I was wondering, so there's like this balance between sorry, something just opened up. So it's like we have this urge, we have this aggression, and then culturally, if our translation of that aggression is too taboo, then it should die, right? And it should be cut off, and it should never be expressed. Right. And so you're saying that like what that does is just totally prevents any of it from being like surfaced and made conscious, right? Because you start with the assumption that it's evil and bad and shouldn't exist. So it seems like, because we talked a little bit last time about the cultural shifts around it, that there were different attitudes about where these things came from. And even though they may have been seen as evil, the response wasn't like, you're evil. It was like, there's evil in the world and you're experiencing it.
Yeah.
So that's pretty major. But the attitude we have about it now, is there any sense that gradual evolution to our individual psyches that begins to like shift the starting point for someone? Or is it always like, where does that, just because we're using cognitive mind to evaluate it, that we get this feeling that it has to be killed and cut off and done away with? Or is there some sense that gradually it becomes easier to be more conscious of those things? So there's some felt sense that we should be able to move on in some way. So I'm not saying this is what I think. So I just want to, like, I'm curious, like, where does the cultural impetus come from to kill it? Is it just because we're relating to it cognitively and not experientially or consciously? Or is it because like the zeitgeist or like the cultural level of consciousness shifts? So there's a sense that some of those lower levels, obviously we're invalidating them in an unconstructive way, but is there some sense in which also the cultural relation to them shifts? So it's like we feel like something should be true that's not right now, right? Mm-hmm. Is there a point in the future where that thing isn't as true as it was because of a shift, both like, consciously and experientially in people?
I lost you right there at the end again.
Okay. I'll get it out. It's going to happen. The phrase that came to mind, like, as you were talking about it, was karmic evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, does the human experience shift over time? in this context that we're talking about?
Yeah, good question. So tell me if I'm understanding the question right. Another way to say it would be like, let's say that if you go back in time, the Viking berserker that was where the culture celebrated bloodlust type of aggression, right? Like it was celebrated the desire to raid and pillage and kill.
Whoever the best was at that, it mattered and it was important.
Yeah, right. And then is your question like, okay, but now a couple hundred years later, where society has, in at least in certain areas of the world, is less violent than that. Is it like breeding animals where, okay, you get a modern human that's lived that let's say is 5th generation or 10th generation of not having to kill or not being raised in a way that kind of warrior spirit is celebrated and is primary and is developed. Is that person literally going to be born kind of with less aggression? Is it that kind of question?
Yeah, it's that kind of question.
Mm-hmm. I mean, go ahead.
Well, it's just, even as you're describing, I'm like, but we're also like in a 80-year long epidemic of anxiety. So like, I don't know, the world wars ended, and now we're all anxious all the time. So
yeah, I mean, I think breeding. I think we know that breeding is a thing, and that it changes. Like they've obviously domesticated certain animals, and they're quite. Humans have gotten quite good at breeding plants and breeding animals and knowing how that works and knowing how to get certain results, how to breed aggression into or out of a certain a certain type of animal. And so there's no reason to think that that's not true of humans. And in fact, there's actually quite obvious evidence that that's also true with humans. But it's it's another topic that you're not allowed to talk about these days. Human breeding it sounds like, to even talk about it, it gets interpreted as like being for some kind of forced breeding.
That's what you're saying, right? This is your proponent of
right.
That's all I heard. If you bring it up, you must be aligned with it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so and it's like my understanding is we don't really know, like, can you breed the aggression right out of the human species? And is that good or not? It's like, well, it depends, I think, on what we're confronted with. If we obviously there's a huge impact as far as over time how the society functions, how a certain family line has functioned, how a certain race, certain region of the world, what the adaptation was, not only in skin color, for example, but what kind of energetic expression was needed to flourish in whatever part of the world one was in, and what was the societal situation. And so have I answered the question?
I think so. I think yes, but I think that the answer I'm hearing is like, we don't really know on some level. I think to I think the question I'm trying to ask, that answers part of it, and the other part of it I'm not sure how to say or to ask, because I think like I whatever the question I'm trying to get to, I'm kind of like hearing and thinking of the things that like make the question kind of irrelevant. And then also, but like there's something that like feels like it's there, but I don't know what it is yet. So I think you are answering the question as I've been able to state it. So
Your the volume when you're talking, or the audio keeps getting interrupted.
oh really? I wonder if it's because I'm streaming it to YouTube. Let me see. And it's just my internet can't keep up. Is that any better? Can you hear? Is it sounding more clear now?
I can't tell it right now. It is, but
Okay,
it
varies.
yeah.
All right, we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Okay.
So I was just saying that I think that as I've been able to ask a question so far, you are answering it.
Okay.
There's something else there that like feels there's. It feels like there's something else there to me, but I don't know how to ask the question yet.
Yeah. Well, if I'm on the same track you are, I mean, it's an important question, as far as what do we, I'm using the word breeding, it's like, what do we want to breed into our society? And I don't mean breeding in the way of like kill off the, this type of person and this type in order to, but I just mean what are we fostering? What are we nurturing in humans? So that down the road, what are we going to look like, right?
Yeah.
Not meaning just look like, but what is our behavior going to look like?
Right. And what will we look like?
All that matters is what we look like. So I mean that I think your question is kind of juxtaposed against it's like we don't really know. There's debate about what's healthiest, right? What's healthiest for the human psyche, and what qualities are important if we were going to try to sort of breed out certain qualities from the human race. Is that a good idea, and or which qualities should we breed out? It's this strange thing. It's like, some people, when confronted with a violent situation, are going to kick into a fight mode and survive, whether that means running out of your burning building versus just hiding under your bed and crying, right? Or just freezing, right? Like there's certain situations where it seems like just going into freeze and hiding and then getting burned to death versus getting the hell out of the house when there was still ample time to do so. It seems like, well, the person that got out of the house, like you would want your family members to be able to mobilize their aggression and get out, right?
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the other end of the spectrum where you wouldn't want your family member to, get so enraged that they, kill someone when that was a huge overreaction. So obviously there's a spectrum, and it's bad, when you're too far in either direction. But we know that even in an individual lifetime, it's like, look, if you've been exposed to situations where you had to deal with life-threatening situations, or let's say there was aggression, or there was violence, or there was, those kind of stresses put on you, and then you develop the ability to deal with that. That leaves you with that power, that ability, that skill, right? And then if a situation arises in the future, you are then likely to be able to mobilize that ability within you. And again, but then on the flip side, it's okay, did that make it so that you to be in a situation where there's, let's say, intense violence, now how do you go live in a peaceful situation and not feel like that these certain structures in your psyche have nowhere to go now, right? Let me say it this way. My understanding and my experience is that we get activated. Places in our psyche get activated at various times in our lives. And then there seems to be, once they're activated, then they're activated going forward. And certain places never get activated in a particular human. So trauma, for example, will activate a place in someone's psyche. Getting beat up, going through a certain life-threatening situation, getting sexually assaulted are big ones, right? They activate a person's psyche that person is not the same again. And the person who hasn't been activated in that way does not understand, does not experience, cannot empathize with the person who has. Right? It's this idea that this energetic activation has occurred. And until you've had that happen, you just don't know. And when someone has had a certain part of their psyche activated, to be in situations or to be among other people who haven't been activated in that way is generally frustrating. Because there's a sense of the vibrations going on in their system are not being held by the community, by the other, by their social group. And it's very, very powerful. One feels it, even if there's good intention all around, even if, it's amazing how powerful a thing it is on the human psyche, how it impacts us.
You're like a ghost.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this idea of ritual, of structures, of groups, of, different things in a society to hold space for, various aspects of the human psyche is a very important thing. And once activated, it's like, well, what needs to happen once there's been an activation? What needs to happen is transmutation. Mm. What needs to happen is that what was activated needs to go from possessing the person to the person possessing what was activated. So it's helped me a lot in my practice when I have a sense of a certain aspect of a person's psyche being activated. So again, I'm using the word activated in a similar way that I think Carl Jung was talking about active imagination, and in a way that the word psychoactive is used with regard to how certain drugs affect the brain. Right? There's this activation that causes a different, more intense, more immediate experience in the human psyche than kind of what the experience is when it's a non-activated occurrence.
Yeah. So that like imaginal transmutation of because activation of the psyche is experiential, and the conceptual framework for what that experience is doesn't line up because it's a new activation, and it's an imaginal journey to transmute that from just this disorienting, seemingly non-personal or seemingly self, but non-identifiable experience or activation into something like coherent or felt or embodied.
Right. So back to the question of, should we have rituals that activate people, and or should we have rituals, understanding, structures, etc., that where we can identify certain kinds of activation and then have those people who are activated in that way get related to in a way that, facilitates the transmutation process? Or should we just tell them they're bad and cancel? Or shame them out of,
I know, it was like heartbreaking, as you said, like, you experience something and then you're surrounded by people that seemingly care but can't empathize.
Right.
Like there's ostensibly doing the right things, but leaving that person outside and alone.
Yeah.
So I think that's a further answer of the earlier question, because there's this kind of, there's like these this sense, even as we talk about it, like there's on some level, like everything is exactly as it is, right? That it can't be anything other than what it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
So to accept that is to acknowledge that like all of these things we're talking about like have to be how they are right now. Right? And you're talking about transmutation is like this opportunity for it to shift, which, like you said, is incredible, because right now it is all like, it's not that. Like there's this so I'm asking about like, what is karmic evolution, or like what is like how it changes, and it's like how it changes is like on this individual level via transmutation, but like what are the cultural things that could actually help that, and what are the like social structures or rituals that like acknowledge the validity of these psychic activations that are happening right now, and the effects of those people are experiencing right now, and not like trying to retroactively judge them as evil and like kill them because it's already happened. Like everything is as it is right now, and like what does like invalidating it as it is right now is the most destructive thing you can do.
Yeah. So I think before I try to answer what I think your question was, just with regard to right now, time comes into the transmutation process. And if you talk quantum physics, the idea that to locate a phenomena in linear space-time, just the words you were using, right? You're talking about validating something that is happening now, and or invalidating it, right? And so it's this confusing thing, because it's like, well, what's needed if a person's activated in a certain way and they're experiencing a certain thing? They've collapsed the wave function into something that is occurring at a certain point in space and time. But then actually the fix, the healing, the transmutation, the development is that occurrence be experienced as a phenomenon, not as a ontological object. And so the truth is arrived back at it actually being a quantum probability field versus that localized point, right? So you kind of get what I'm saying, that it's,
Yeah.
because like if you take, just the idea that, let's just say, the duality of love and hate, the dialectic of that is that they are two sides of one thing, right? Not even two different sides, but that they're a dialectic. It's both and not some homogenization, but literally the whole contains both things in the entire spectrum, everything from just the one to just the other. And that when you split the dialectic, then you get this occurrence of the one or the other, right? And the activation that happens in the human psyche in my understanding is it involves that. It involves an energetic occurrence that hits a place in the psyche that disrupts or activates the psyche in a way that the psyche responds by being faced with an awareness of the paradoxical duality. Does that make sense?
Say it one more time. So, I mean,
so in the same way that
move back towards that paradoxical, or like say it one more time.
So when your mind's operating according to a certain duality, right? Right now, you've got a sense of what's up and what's down, right? And it's very important, because
let's not undo that before I have to go to work later today.
Yeah, right. So there's this like set scope that you have with regard to up down right now. And then if I said, well, yeah, but that's just relative, right? Up down relative to what? Because you could say, well, what is what, and you might say, well, north is up, and it's like, or away from the earth is up, right? Or you might say that, if you were in Antarctica right now, you'd probably say south is up. Right. And so when you're presented with that, it's like, well, wait, now your set parameters get blown out of stability. And so then where do you find yourself? Well, you got to either tolerate the relativity, or you got to just decide on a set of parameters and hang on tight, even though that's not it. But if you have a situation that's challenging that, well, then you're in trouble, right? So you can have your set mind state about a certain truth, but when you're hit with evidence to the contrary, when you're hit with an experience that confronts you with a challenge to that, well, then there's the potential for activation. Right? Because you literally get thrown out of that sort of secure set thing you had going.
Yeah.
And then what do? Well, you either grab, either experience this conflict, and or you grab the one side and put the other side into shadow.
Yeah. It's like you're in an unconscious collapsed waveform.
Right.
And then you become conscious of that, and you either rigidify into that, or like via this activation.
Consciousness won't let you rigidify. Consciousness has the opposite effect.
Consciousness won't, but like activation isn't necessarily conscious.
Right.
But right, if via consciousness you see the activation happening, then you move into that confusional state regarding that dimension.
Yes.
And then the opportunity for it to transmute into a dialectic, where it was once a collapse waveform on one unconscious collapse waveform.
Yeah. And then another part of the paradox is what you eventually realize is that the truth is that it was always a dialectic, right? The original state of it.
Yeah.
I think that is really a dialectic.
Yeah.
Just like if you eventually realize that what you thought was up isn't some kind of absolute up, the universe might have just changed for you, but there typically is an understanding that
it was the universe before that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. So this awakening, this hierarchical process of allowing a transmutation and adjusting is the hallmark of shifting levels of consciousness. Because if you stay rigidified at in a certain duality, and you won't accept the dialectic of it, then it tends to function to inhibit you from developing further. Now, all development isn't linear, and so people have accepted. It's this strange thing, it's like we've accepted dialectics on, let's say, certain higher chakras, and we still haven't on certain lower chakras. And so it creates, you know what I mean? There's all this.
Yeah, it doesn't happen all at once.
No.
Or in order, or depending on your structure. Is that kind of what you're alluding to? Like we all have different, just different stories. Different like life experiences that don't follow a set developmental path.
Right. Yeah, levels of there's certain ways that if you have trauma at level 2, whatever that means, you're not going to get to level 3.
Yeah.
Certain things. But then there's other parts of our psyche where no, that's not, because there's a whole bunch of different lines of development.
Right.
Which, Wilber gets into that, trying to create models that, so you may be very inhibited or stunted in certain physical regards, but not intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you have certain physical trauma, it's going to inhibit you physically in various ways. So it's both, right? There's just like with mental knowledge, it's like, look, if you with math, it builds on itself. And so if you can't skip multiplication and division and just go on to algebraic functions. It's like
Yeah.
Or language is like that. So we're jumping all over, obviously, but just for me, one of the huge shifts in how I, in a worldview shift was becoming aware of energetics and becoming aware of how they affect my body and how they affect my mind, and becoming aware that, my relationship and my interpretation of those energies is variable. And so what is truth becomes more relative. And the idea that, that there can be profound change in how I feel, how I experience myself and others in life. And developing more and more of a understanding of what is the experience of imaginal work, and so in the same way that on a physical level, if you're gonna try to work out in order to cause an adaptation in your body, then ideally you have this understanding of, okay, for example, what does that feel like, and how should you interpret how you feel, right? If you're going to go running, or if you're going to lift weights, or if you're going to do yoga, or it's like, okay, at what point, if you experience discomfort, should you stop immediately? Or how far into the discomfort should you go, right, before it's bad, right? And of course, there's all kinds of science with regard to physical adaptation, right? What's overtraining, what's undertraining, how much recovery should you allow? And we're all doing this as far as, we're trying to sense, okay, is the discomfort, is the soreness, is the fatigue, for example, that I'm feeling right now, if I endure this, will it be productive, or am I doing something that's actually counterproductive, right? And it's like, well, duh, yeah, we all know this. We all intuitively do this in our bodies. But we don't tend to do it in our minds. We don't tend to do it in our energy bodies. We just kind of have these set structures in our mind of, we want pleasure, not pain. We want, and so to allow and experience fear and to stay with it and allow it versus what do I do to get away from the fear is the whole, again, all these various wisdom traditions have looked at it this way, that it's not just about, let's get it so that you feel better right now, but rather, what's the experience you're having?
Yeah.
And what does that experience really mean? What is, is it really a threat from the outside that you need to respond to right now? Or is it more an internal experience going on? Or like I said before, like, okay, if you're feeling frustrated, or you're feeling left out, or you're feeling intimidated, or this or that, it's like, well, what needs to be done? And it's like, well, it depends. In certain cases, you should tough it out. In certain cases, the environment should notice that you're feeling that way and then be adjusted. It depends.
Mm.
But adaptation and growth and healing and undoing of pathological patterns is typically going to involve allowing energy to move in a way that your mind is literally going to tell you is wrong.
Mm.
And again, we know this with yoga. You do a yoga, the instructor tries to get you into the correct posture and your body goes, I don't think so. And then it's like, okay, but the whole practice of yoga involves gradually, feeling into that discomfort and going into a posture that's literally uncomfortable. Right. And it's like, well, why would you do that? Well, because there's an adaptation that occurs.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what is mental yoga? What is energetic yoga? What is, and it's like, that's what transmutation is. There's this process that happens. Just like if you do 20 push-ups, you're more tired at the end and you literally can't do, let's say 20 is your max. So you go to failure and it's like, well, look at you just weakened yourself, right? Because right now you can't do another push-up. And so that was dumb. You should have saved that for when you really needed to do 20 push-ups.
You're going to be in trouble later.
Right. And it's like, no, but we know that this adaptation happens in our body. And as a result of doing that, you literally are stronger next time. And it's like, there's this adaptation that goes on in our psyche that again, isn't just what feels best.
Yeah.
But all kinds of uncomfortable, confusing, paradoxical, seemingly evil energies and experiences ideally get looked at and endured and worked with and therefore transmuted.
So that imaginal journeying is like allowing those associations to surface.
Right.
Not cutting off from that experience. So there's like the felt experience of like, fear, or you're talking about like physical pain from exercise and it's like, it's not just, we can be afraid and then respond to it and do something, but it's also like allowing like the full extent of what you're actually afraid of to surface.
Yeah.
Via symbols or via, mental narratives or whatever that kind of arise from it. And then in doing that, is that just naturally, I guess it's not, it's not, like so if you consciously observe that and witness what arises, like that's like one step as far as this imaginal journey towards transmutation.
Mm-hmm.
And then like holding it, actually letting it register and like feeling it, not just seeing it. Is that fair?
Yep. So generally speaking, there's two different ways you can go. You can, if you're experiencing it from the ego perspective, what you're going to experience is fear, confusion, overwhelm, dying, emptiness, right? Like that. That's going to be the experience, because what you are trying to hold on to, what you are trying to maintain is coming undone. And so again, it's like, what, well, so that's the experience from the ego. And if you can allow that, which, let me just get back to that for a second. If you come at it from the other direction, the conscious mind, in alchemy, it's the philosopher's stone. The conscious mind is the vessel, is the agent, if you will, that causes the transmutation, right? So the ego has this terrible experience of coming undone, and oh my God, it's awful, and death and confusion and insanity and evil and absolute nothingness, etc., and then arrives back at the it's all okay, conscious, beautiful, loving experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when someone comes in with a tension that starts from there, then, they're literally the process is facilitated in a way that it's not as overwhelming to that ego, because there's a container, because there's a support, because there's a reflection.
Mm.
So if you're having the, oh my God, this is terrible, I'm, experience, and if I'm in there providing, if I can look at that particular dimension and be conscious there, then literally you're using my conscious mirror, my conscious container to transmute your experience, resulting in you having a conscious container for it.
Yeah.
So again, we're all in the throes of ego experience where we're desperately trying to maintain our dualistic collapse experience because we know that to be true or right or correct, or that's what we want. And life is constantly challenging that. And then we have our places where we can allow that it's a dialectic. It's, there's not a set certain truth to it. And so what you recognize is that the thing that was experienced a certain way at this level, up here, it's experienced differently. So it might be hatred down here, but up here it might be, passionate romance. And it's like, yeah, but it's the same, just like the flame that is the pilot light of your furnace, might be converted to cool air, right? It's like, wait, what? Right? Because even if let alone that it's just nice, warm, toasty air in the winter that's, literally keeping you from freezing to death, but it's starting out as a flame that would absolutely destroy you if you came into direct contact with it.
Yeah.
Right. But there's this housing and this conversion process. And again, that idea that there's a pilot light in our unconscious. And if you look at that too directly, meaning if you go below the first chakra, let's say, and experience, what are the energies like before they go from there, it's what we call hell.
Yeah.
Like it's literally experienced as a burning, inferno. Our psyche translates it that way. And then, of course, there's the debate: is that dimension the real, or is But whether you think it's real or not, that's how our psyche tends to experience it.
It would be fun to get into hell next time then, but because that's on the list of things, so it would be.
Let's not get into it, but just talk about it.
No, let's get into hell. Let's, sign up for the tour.
Yeah,
it's such a good question. Like, is that the real? And because whatever feels most imminent seems like the most primary, right? Mm-hmm. So like what
That's well put. Yeah.
uh and it's like if you dig down or climb up, like you're chasing something, right? You're trying to find it elsewhere. And so like both things are going to lead to like different but like similar like consequences, right?
Yeah.
So like uh if heaven's the real or hell's the real, like it's both missing the lesson of like what, where and how we exist in this like self. So there's just, I think it's fascinating, and I think it's, we, like you said, the force that keeps us from, what was it, what is fear? So fear is the um force that prevents questioning the existing structure is fear. And it's like fear because like what is the structure that's built around like an actual self that we're like identifying with? The thing that prevents us from examining that is fear. And it doesn't matter like which direction you go from that structure, it's still fear, like what that means to allow for acknowledging what the state is.
Yeah.
So it's because you're signing up then for just a long series of like confusional states, and you're signing up for like a lot of, yeah, just a lot of identifying and disidentifying and deconstructing and um and if you think that's hell, right, like then like you're gonna run from that.
Right.
And if you think that's heaven, then you're going to be really even more confused, because it's not going to feel like you think heaven is, right? So even if you aspire to like this transmutation you're talking about, but don't acknowledge the dialectical nature of the endpoint, then it will be incredibly discouraging and like seemingly fruitless.
Yeah. Yeah. Very much.
And I think another thing to talk about down the road is like what still remains after transmutation. So something's changing from one thing into another, but there's, I mean, that's like a summary, but I think there's more detail to like what that state is then after transmutation.
Yeah. And just, I mean, in a word, I'd say presence. That you have conscious presence, which was the truth to begin with, which was the light that went out, so to speak, when you split the thing into two.
Yeah.
It causes a disconnect that makes the light go out.
Yeah. I think one thing I would like to hear what you think about on it is like, it feels related to me is like Ram Dass, like said, he still had every single neurosis he ever had.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So like he's 90 years old. He's like, I'm still just as neurotic. It just doesn't affect me the same way. Like I'm just making a different choice about how to respond to the neuroses that I've always had. It's just the way that he talked about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think there are neuroses that one would no longer have because there'd be change in the ego.
Yeah.
Because I would say that if the theory of neurosis involves a sublimation of energies, right? That it's energetic movement that the mind figures out a different way to experience.
Yeah.
And the transmutation process actually specifically undoes the need for that.
Okay.
Now, it gets into that category where I would say when Ram Dass is making that statement, he's talking about waking up, not growing up. And he's talking about, you know,
Okay.
non-dual awareness.
Yeah.
Which is a different thing than the transmutation process. It's, the imaginal, archetypal, depth psychology kind of spirituality is different than the, like, my understanding is that they're different states, right? If you go out into a non-dual or a certain kind of higher chakra state, that's a certain thing that's different than transmuting first chakra stuff, for example.
Okay.
Just very, very different.
Yeah.
In the same way that if you can train for a marathon, that's different than contemplating non-duality, right? They're like very different things, but they both have big impacts on you.
Yeah.
If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.